Hi, Jonathan York, Bay Financial Partners, looking at investment markets. Obviously, the big news really has been President Trump being tested positive for COVID. That saw him spend about 3 days in hospital, but he's now been released and he's back in the White House. Now, while he was in hospital, again, conflicting reports, but it looks like he did receive oxygen, but also as well received sort of an experimental cocktail of sort of antiviral drugs, which appear to have sort of helped in the treatment. Now, the big issue is obviously Trump has come out and sort of said that he's feeling fine, never felt better, etc., etc. Shouldn't be worried by COVID. Clearly, though, if evidence is sort of anything to go by with other cases, he's still contagious. He's now back in the White House and potentially putting his staff at risk. And this has partially sort of been backed up by the fact that many of his staff have actually come down with the virus as well and tested positive. And it's now just going to be very interesting to see how this sort of plays out over the next sort of 1 to 2 weeks. Especially as we're on the sort of home straight now for the election, November the 3rd. There's supposed to be a presidential debate coming up very soon, and it's going to be interesting to see if that's going to be allowed to take place. Because, if you look at it, COVID normally has sort of a 14-day sort of incubation period and sort of recovery period, and clearly the president will be very close to only just getting past that sort of 14 days before he'd have to go and debate against Joe Biden. And obviously, his behaviour has drawn quite a bit of criticism from the medical experts. Again, he sort of appeared on the White House standing there, and the first thing he did was remove his mask. So I'd say just going to be very interesting to see how this sort of plays out, because in the latest polls, after the first debate, Biden actually gained a little bit of a sort of further lead out there, and is around sort of 10 to 14 points ahead in most of the polls now. Now, as well with this COVID outbreak within the Republican Party, it potentially could put a little bit of a spanner in the works for his nomination for the Supreme Court Justice. Because as we stand at present, there are several Republican senators who have contracted the virus, are tested positive, and are now having to self-isolate and obviously can't get into Congress to vote. Well, on the economy side, the US is still doing okay. The latest job numbers were reasonable. Again, still creating jobs. But, obviously coming from that very low base after the sort of shutdown with COVID. But, if you look at the indices, the stock markets, the sort of, the Dow Jones is sort of trading sort of plus or minus a couple of hundred points from around the sort of 28,000, which is not too bad, really. But potentially, for the economy still to push on, you need sort of further stimulus package coming through. There's still, a pretty major debate going on between the Democrats and Republicans, and they really can't come to any sort of agreement on that. Now, also what President Trump won't like as well is it looks like China has recovered much better than most of the other countries coming out of COVID, and their economy is really pushing on at a pretty reasonable rate now. And that certainly appears to be backed up as well by the import numbers coming into China, but also as well obviously from the export figures coming out from other countries. Oil still trading around that sort of $39 a barrel on WTI, and again really hasn't shown any sort of spike in prices as we head into that northern hemisphere winter. EU continues to see a spike in cases, as does the UK. And as I said before, the UK is really facing some pretty dramatic changes out there, some pretty major sort of limitations on movement, meetings, etc., that potentially could last for the next 6 months. Now, the UK is also facing fresh pressure out there with Brexit as well. Potentially, Boris Johnson and the Conservative government are sort of looking at just ignoring part of the sort of treaty and deal that was sort of struck, and that's going to be very interesting to see if that is challenged in the legal courts. Closer to home with Australia, there is now talk that they say there will be a sort of slight lifting of the borders between New Zealand and Australia, but only going one way. New Zealanders going into Australia won't have to face quarantine going into certain states, and that's obviously a major boost for the Australian economy. A little bit of a boost as well. In fact, that sort of Victoria is now sort of again starting to lift some of its restrictions after their COVID outbreak, and again they appear to be sort of on top of the virus and getting it in control. But certainly that opening up of the borders is a major boost, let's say, for the Australian economy, and it'll just be very interesting to see how that sort of plays through going into year end. Now here in New Zealand, we've already started voting now for the election. The election date is October the 17th, but the polls opened up this weekend, and so far early voting has been pretty robust. Still in the polls, it looks like it's Labor's to lose, but what does appear to be clear now is the fact that Labor won't be able to govern on their own. And certainly Jacinda Ardern is facing a little bit of criticism for not opening up the border with Australia, because certainly the New Zealand tourism industry would really love to see that those borders open, even if it was just with Australia to get those international tourists coming through. But say that's not happening. If you're coming into New Zealand now, you still have to face that 14-day quarantine period. But there is some talk that we might get a little bit of a bubble going, opening up with the Cook Islands and some of the Pacific Islands, and that would be a little bit of a boost, though really more to the islands rather than New Zealand, really. Now, if you are looking for income, Oceania Health has a bond in the marketplace, 7 years. The rate hasn't been set yet, but the minimum rate will be 2.3. Now, if you're interested in that, call us on 0800 867 323. Now, in this low interest rate environment, it is pretty difficult if you're looking for income, but there are plenty of alternatives available out there. And if you're interested in discussing what is available, call us on 0800 867 323 or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz. For lots of interesting articles, and we'll look forward to speaking to you soon.